Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Brandon McKenzie, the CEO of Listacross, a brand new company. Good afternoon, Brandon, in your case. How you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me today. So can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, sure. So Listacross is, believe it or not, my second startup. My first was a company called Metro Butler. We were a short-term and vacation rental management company based out of New York. We had roughly 350 listings under management at the time I left that company. Before that, I had a brief stint in, well, not brief, several years in talent representation in the entertainment industry. So a lot of babysitting celebrities.
Hmm.
And uh, a little bit before and post Metro Butler, I was a practicing attorney. I occasionally nowadays say I'm a recovering attorney because I continually get dragged back into practice. And then I founded Listacross in the fall of 2019. So we're still very young.
Yes, a true startup, which is always
Mhm.
fun to talk to the true entrepreneurs. So
Yeah, we've all got that special brand of crazy, I'm sure.
yes, it's a good brand though. So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as a remote employee and a remote employer now?
Yeah, so this actually isn't my first stint as a remote employee slash employer. When I exited Metro Butler, this was 2018, I went to go run North America for a company called Fantastic Stay. And this will become more relevant later in our conversation. They are a multi-channel distribution and management platform for short-term and vacation rentals. So very similar to Listacross, but the idea would be, let's say you were an enterprise level vacation manager and you had 500 or 1,000 Airbnb listings. We could push those listings to Airbnb, HomeAway, Booking.com, Expedia, VRBO. And they were a European based company. So when I was brought on to run North America, it was at first just me. So I was working remotely, and that was really interesting. It was a really good way to cut my teeth on remote work, and not just in terms of doing the work, but also developing systems and processes for holding myself accountable and for collaborating with my other teammates. And a lot of those lessons were really great and particularly applicable to the current landscape, where now I have a team. There are several of us, and we're actually in the process of onboarding 2 or 3 more. And I'd say for us, the most critical thing is just staying motivated, making sure that everybody's staying on top of their deliverables and that we're all accountable to one another. And, communications platforms only go so far. So you have Slack, you have Zoom, you have, Google Docs. That's all fine and good. But at the same time, I find that it's very effective to have a little bit of a human touch. So when we're on Zoom, we have our weekly staff meetings
Mhm.
where everybody reports to the rest of the team and gives one another visibility into what they're working on. So we all realize, hey, this is the mission that we're all working on together. We're working towards a common goal. And, we celebrate our successes and we identify our opportunities for improvement and our shortfalls and where we need help. And it's a really good way of holding ourselves accountable and keeping us accountable to one another.
Hmm. Interesting. So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
I mean, I would love to see more tools for sort of monitoring and celebrating and promoting that level of accountability.
Mhm.
And I know there are a number out there. I know a lot of folks sort of in the startup community will use tools like Monday or Trello. Pretty basic stuff, but it's just a way to keep track of your projects.
Mhm.
And I think in the coming months and years, you're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more software tools, particularly things with a bit of a human touch. Um, and I think there's going to be a lot wider spread adoption, because I think nowadays it's pretty hard to justify. Like when you think about it, if you look at a lot of these major companies now where their stay-at-home orders and all their employees have to work from home, and they're seeing at least as much, if not more, productivity out
Right.
of their folks who now no longer have, say, an hour and a half or 2 hours of commuting time a day. Notwithstanding the folks who have children running into the room while they're on Zoom meetings,
Right.
but if you're seeing that level of increased productivity, and what's the like the overhead for that? It's what, potentially getting an employee, a monitor, a keyboard, maybe a standing desk,
Mhm.
versus if you're thinking about New York City employers, potentially millions of dollars in real estate carrying costs. I would be very surprised if the world were to return back to what we used to think of as normal, when this is all over, or as close to over as it can be.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think it'll go to a hybrid model to start.
Yeah, I
But
mean, and think
this
about
time
all the
next
things that.
year, go ahead.
Yeah, if you think about all the safety precautions too that have to be implemented, especially for, if you're talking, Fortune 500 employers, folks with thousands of people in a given office. Let's say you've got an elevator bank of 2 or 3 or 4 elevators, and you have thousands of employees showing up to work, and now they have to, follow social distancing guidelines for some period of time. How do you get them into the office? Do you
Mm-hmm.
space out their desks? Do you stagger the times when they can ride the elevator?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of special considerations there that didn't exist before all of this.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, Google recently announced that any employee that can work from home who has the ability to can do so for the rest of 2020.
Yeah. I mean, and
It's
I'm
coming.
hearing of friends and colleagues getting sent surveys by their employers asking, how do you feel like this has affected your productivity? Would you like to return to the office? Would you like to continue working from home? I mean, the smart employers, I'm sure, are crowdsourcing data on this now to
Mm-hmm.
figure out, all right, should we shift our strategy? Maybe potentially reduce our real estate footprint and associated costs. Can we maintain the same level of productivity?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are surprised that they have been able to, and a lot of people I've talked to have actually said they're surprised that they're more productive. And the big thing is, if you're in New York, I'm in San Francisco, is traffic. You gain when you don't have to go into the office, you gain at least 2 hours a day in those cities,
Hmm.
right? And that's huge,
Absolutely.
both from just a quality of life perspective, an environmental perspective, and a productivity perspective. You are more. I mean, I'm more productive if I don't have to spend an hour in my car and an hour on the subway to get into work.
Mhm. I also think there's something that gets a little bit lost in the shuffle there. And what I think it is the focus on outcomes rather than process.
Mm-hmm.
So, I see this within our own organization. It's what are your deliverables? What are your dependencies? Where are your teammates waiting on you for something? And we're not thinking in terms of, did you clock in and clock out? Did you show up at the office at 9 a.m. and,
Right.
leave by 5? It's, here's the work that needs to be done. Whether this takes you 2 hours or 9 hours, is almost inconsequential. It's are we achieving the mission?
Right.
And that focus, I think, is changing in a lot of ways. And I'm hearing it from friends, colleagues, people in other lines of work. They're saying, I didn't realize when I was in the office just how much time I was just wasting
I know.
dilly-dallying. So,
Yeah, I think the only thing we got to really learn to juggle now on the remote standpoint is if you have small kids at home, it does pose a unique challenge. So
mhm.
my youngest is 30, so I don't have that issue, but I know a lot of people that do. Actually, my youngest is close to you right now. He lives in Manhattan. So, so what is the story behind Listacross? What is your product? Who are your customers? And when are you going to launch?
Yeah, so we are a multi-channel distribution and management platform for peer-to-peer marketplaces. So a simple user-friendly way to think about it that's accessible by most is, let's say I want to sell my iPhone today.
Hmm.
There are a lot of conventional channels that people use to do that. So it might be Craigslist, OfferUp, LetGo, Facebook Marketplace, or one of the dozens of others that are out there. And there are a number of specialized marketplaces. What Listacross lets you do is you can create that listing, for that inventory on our platform, and then push it out to all those channels simultaneously, while being also able to manage it centrally. So a good example of something that you might need to manage centrally is communications. So on Craigslist, which is what we refer to as a dual activation platform. By dual activation, I mean both buyer and seller need to activate the transaction by communicating with one another,
Hmm.
versus say in Amazon, where it's a single activation platform. If you want to buy something on Amazon, you add it to cart and you check out. The seller does nothing. So um, on the dual activation platforms, what you see a lot is there's a necessary communications component. So the buyer will reach out and say, "Hey, I'd like to buy your cell phone." And on OfferUp, that's a proprietary messenger. On LetGo, they have their own messaging inbox. Facebook Marketplace uses Facebook Messenger, but it's a derivative version of it. So you would go into your Facebook Messenger inbox, and then there's a sub tab for Marketplace. Imagine listing something on 12 different platforms and getting messages, not knowing where they're coming from and having to log in and out of all of those platforms, remembering where you listed something. And then ultimately, when it does finally sell, if you are keeping track of it offline, say in an Excel spreadsheet, then you have to remember to go in, log into all those platforms and unlist it. Or if you forget to put some content, you might have to go in and edit each one of those listings individually. We take that pain away by letting you do it all from one place directly in our platform. And the folks we're targeting, there's this common misconception. People are like, oh, that'd be great. If I'm moving from one New York City or San Francisco apartment to another, what a great way to sell all my stuff. That's fine, and there's room in our platform for those customers, but they're not really our core focus, because that might just be a one and done. They might say, this is great, I've used it for a week, and see you again, never. What we're really going after is the larger market opportunity in two segments. And the first is what we call power sellers. So these are, large scale e-commerce players, or folks who are really leveraging the full power of these peer-to-peer marketplaces, and then conventional retail. So for the power sellers, there are a few widely adopted definitions, and they vary platform to platform. eBay, for example, says somebody who does $3,000 a year in gross merchandise volume across 100 or more transactions is a power seller. Whereas Etsy, their minimum threshold is $13,000, and this is on a per channel basis. So assume somebody's selling $13,000 worth of inventory on Etsy, you might reasonably assume that they're selling just as much, if not more, on eBay or a similar platform. So these people are really making a living out of it. And when you think about these markets in a very general sense, roughly, depending on the platform, 10 to 15% of their user base are sellers. So the rest are buyers, browsers, what have you. And a further 10 to 15% of those are these power sellers. So roughly 1 to 3% of the total peer-to-peer marketplace users are these power sellers. And they're just doing this on a recurring basis. A lot of these people are doing it for a living. So I don't know if you've ever traded in an old cell phone. Happens a lot. People will take their old iPhone and say, oh, I'm going to send this to such and such a company, and they'll give me a credit towards the purchase of my new iPhone. Right. Well, those phones go somewhere. A lot of the time they will go to remanufacturers and refurbishers who will, maybe change a screen or a speaker or something like that, and then post them on eBay. And these guys can make, $1 million a year, if not more, doing this. So these are real high volume sellers. They're dealing with high average order value items. And those are the folks we are really building this. We're building this with those people in mind. It's, you really need this because you're managing a high number of SKUs, a ton of inventory across a ton of platforms, and you just need a way to manage it and keep track of all of it. So that's segment number one. And then segment number two is the more interesting piece, and that is offline retailers. So it's probably no secret to anybody at this point that retail has been a bit of a bloodbath lately. Hearing major retailers, companies like J. Crew declaring bankruptcy, because they're very heavily reliant on foot traffic. And this stage in the world, that doesn't really exist. So if you think about retail in the US, it was $3.76 trillion last year. Wow. Of that, only 8% was e-commerce, 92% was conventional offline retail. And of that 92%, 45% was offline only, meaning these people are foot traffic reliant. They have zero online presence. There's no e-commerce driving their business whatsoever. And we see that as a huge missed opportunity. And we want to build tools to help those people in particular. So I can give you sort of an off-the-shelf example that keeps coming up on many a conversation I have, and that's sporting goods. So here in New York, we're under this stay-at-home order. Gyms are closed. People can't stay in shape, but they want to. They want to work out. They can't go to the gym. They're stuck at home. So the natural reaction is, all right, maybe I can get some home fitness equipment. Maybe I'll go get a set of dumbbells and I'll work out at home. Well, if sporting goods retailers are closed, then that opportunity doesn't exist. And it has some really, somewhat logical but interesting effects on supply and demand. Supply is constrained and demand has spiked. So now what you're seeing is what used to be a $200 pair of dumbbells at a Dick's Sporting Goods or a Modell's now trades on Facebook Marketplace for $1,500, $1,600, $1,700. And the way I look at that is I see that as being not only burdensome on the consumer, on the buyer, but also a missed opportunity for the seller. So let's say Dick's Sporting Goods or Modell's could offer contactless payments and curbside pickup, and they had millions of dollars worth of dumbbells like that inventory just sitting fallow. Our platform would give them a channel to say, reach your customers where they are and where they're looking right now. They're looking on Facebook, they're looking on Craigslist, they're looking on OfferUp. And then the value proposition also shifts a little bit. So there might be a guy selling his guitar out of his garage right now for $500, and Guitar Center might have a similar guitar, or a mom and pop music store might have a similar guitar for $50 more. And a lot of people who are looking on Craigslist are saying, you know what, I'm going here because I want the best deal. That's not always true, because there are sort of the hidden costs of engaging with these marketplaces. So if you're selling me your guitar and I engage with you, well, under normal circumstances, would you be at the office during the day? Would we have to coordinate a time for pickup, maybe on the weekend or before or after work? And, there's going to be a lot of back and forth. Maybe the buyer flakes, and just disappears, or maybe the seller stops responding. If I'm a guitar shop and I'm competing against you and I say, hey, look, my guitar is $50 more, sure, but here's our business address and here's our hours. Come by whenever you want, and you can pay with a credit card and you get a warranty with it, right? For certain buyers, the value proposition changes and they'll say, you know what, that convenience is worth the extra $50 for me for essentially the same thing or something similar. Now, that's not true across all items, but it certainly is across some items. And there's an additional layer of opportunity there for the business. It's potentially, a benefit to the buyer. And that's, you get to the store and now the business can say, hey, do you also want an amp or some patch cables or some effects pedals? And, there's an upsell opportunity. And for the buyer, that might, that just may be so easy that it's worth it. And they'll say, you know what, I'm here. I do need patch cables. And the ad on Craigslist didn't offer that.
Right.
So those are the two core segments that we're targeting.
Very interesting. And I can even say from personal experience, I know a lot of people that won't purchase used equipment on some of those sites, or they won't sell, mainly they won't sell them on those sites because they don't want people coming to their house.
Yeah, there are certainly safety and privacy concerns.
Yeah.
Strangely, it's one of the things that people really like about Craigslist. The buyer profiles on each of these platforms is a little different, but anonymity is one of these things that a lot of Craigslist buyers and sellers value. Whereas buyers on Facebook Marketplace, a lot of them skew towards valuing trust, because you can see someone's first name, last name, mutual friends. There's that feeling of maybe I'm less likely to get scammed or end up, in somebody's creepy apartment where I might get stabbed.
Yes. So how did you incorporate the idea of remote at your company? I mean, you just started, so it sounds like you started out as a remote company. Is that true?
Yeah, more or less. So my co-founder and I have been working together. We had been working together, not remote, in real life. And we brought on our lead developer a few months back, and he's based in Virginia. So that was our first little foray into it. And as we're staffing up and bringing on more people, front-end development, back-end development, UI, UX, sales, customer success, that was right at that inflection point of coronavirus is taking hold and everybody's being ordered to work at home. And we really embraced it. We were like, this is a great opportunity. We are now able to cast a much wider net. Whereas before, you might post a job posting and people would say, oh, I only want to show up to an office in my local market. I want to be in New York. I want to, go to work 9 to 5 or what have you. And then coronavirus took hold. Everybody's essentially ordered to stay at home. The economy starts collapsing. People are losing their jobs. There's, again, this high supply constrained demand in the job market. And you have all these qualified candidates who are like, let me reassess, my view of the world, like the lens that I'm looking at this through, the workforce. And we started seeing insane responses to our job postings where we were saying, we're an entirely remote team, and here are the tools we use to collaborate, and here's how we work. And, if this speaks to you, and of course, does the role speak to you, let's talk. And the reception to that was overwhelmingly positive. Everybody's saying, this is fantastic. You're telling me I can work from home, I can work from anywhere. We had to be a little bit sensitive to time zones.
Hmm.
But nothing's particularly out of the ordinary. We have one person on the West Coast, and the rest of us are all on the East Coast time zone. So it's actually not problematic. We couldn't really look at people who were, we did get applicants who were overseas, and when the time difference gets just too great, it becomes untenable.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, the recruiting process for remote candidates was overwhelmingly positive for both the candidates and for us. And we've really been enjoying the process so far. The one thing I'd say that's lacking, and just back to your earlier point about sort of what the future is of remote employment, is I want to make sure that as a company we don't lose that human touch.
Hmm.
Because people are siloed. You don't necessarily have visibility. It's not just visibility into what they're working on a day-to-day basis. It's also, we're collaborating on Slack. You're not talking to the person next to you, and socializing and, maintaining that, that level of personal touch. And to the extent that we are able to preserve elements of that, we do value that, and we want to continue doing that. And that's something that, frankly, for all that potential software that I mentioned being developed, if somebody can crack that effectively, I think that'd be of tremendous value. We're not exactly going out for happy hour drinks with our coworkers at the end of the day anymore.
Yeah, no, and most of the CEOs, CIOs I talk to, that's the biggest roadblock right now. It's the personal touch. It's not the technical.
Yeah.
So, especially with people that are technically, competent,
Hmm.
it's no big deal for them to learn how to learn Slack or Asana or any of those Twilio, all that stuff. It's no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I
yeah, so,
mean, most of these tools, people are already familiar, or they pick it up in no time.
yeah. Well, a lot of them they learn in college too. I mean, I know
Yeah,
the
that
kids
too.
in college all use GitHub.
Yeah. I mean, I'm blown away by our UI UX team. It's like when they started, they had basically already had like deliverables for what I had envisioned being 3 to 4 weeks of work. They're just like, here it is already. We're so excited about it that
Hmm.
we've already put this stuff together, and they're just leaps and bounds ahead of where I think of where I was or my peers were coming out of college.
Yeah, and it's even more so true for me. I started on punch cards, so remember those?
Yeah, I mean, it's all like the world is much smaller and moves a lot faster than you realize until it smacks you in the face these days.
Yes, this is true. So there are companies like Gabriel that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups. How important do you
Mhm.
think this will be in your particular situation where you're gonna, at some point you're gonna need to scale quickly and you're gonna need to find the right people to help you scale?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's definitely a real value. It's certainly a real value there, and I think for a lot of companies, the services you guys offer are going to be absolutely critical. uh, for us, we did this balancing act early on of how nimble do we have to be? How many fires are we going to have to put out in essentially real time? And what does that mean for us? As in, do we need our own in-house team working on this consistently? What of this stuff could we potentially offshore as a cost saving measure? Because, look, to be frank, there are a number of dev shops that are overseas that their rates, there's essentially nothing stateside that's even close to competitive, and the quality of the work is still phenomenal. But
Mm-hmm.
what you lose there is that personal touch, that personal oversight, the closeness to it. And if there's a time zone difference and you have to do rapid iteration on the fly, uh, there is a little bit of that can get lost. So it's a trade-off. It's what am
Mm-hmm.
I willing to sacrifice in exchange for reduced cost versus do I need this all to be in-house, and am I going to pay top dollar for that privilege?
Right.
And where I see you guys fitting in is you're that nice happy medium, the balance between the two, for teams that probably need a little bit of both and
Right.
don't know how to balance that.
Yeah. This is true. And the other thing we provide is we have experience managing remote teams, which a
Mhm.
lot of people don't. I mean, I've actually managed teams in 3 different continents. So, and you're right, the time difference is really the biggest issue. right?
Well, so the other thing is, I think with a lot of other startups that, I've got friends, colleagues, people I've worked closely with, there are varying degrees of quality. And I think something that's really, really challenging about working with overseas developers is the recruiting and vetting process.
Yes.
Because you can go online and you can, go on Upwork or look for some of these teams and you can read reviews, but reviews only tell you so much. Some of them are inflated, some of them are artificial. They'll
Hmm.
have their own people writing 5-star reviews. Um, and then what if you want to take it a step further? You find out who their old clients are and you do direct outreach and you start talking to their clients and saying, what was your experience? What were the pitfalls? What were the strengths, weaknesses, things like that? That's an insanely time consuming process. And
Hmm.
it's absolutely necessary if you're going to go that route, because if you're dealing in large sums of money and you're offshoring something, and you might get sold, snake oil or a bill of goods, and somebody says, yeah, we can deliver on all these promises, and you're 2 months in and you find out that they're learning on the job and have no idea what they're doing, and maybe you've made a first installment payment.
Yes.
That could be fatal. Um, and sometimes it's almost like that guitar analogy on Craigslist. It's like, do you want to pay the extra $50, for the developer, for you guys, versus offshoring, where you get that peace of mind of, yes, I can pay with a credit card and there's a warranty.
Hmm.
The quality difference and the reduction in time expenditure of vetting and sourcing and researching, can really pay dividends,
Yes.
especially when you need to move fast and get a product to market or into beta testing quickly.
Yes, I agree. Well, Brandon, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been very interesting. You have some great viewpoints on this. Um,
Yeah, my pleasure.
have a great day.
You too. Thank you again for having me.
You're welcome. Talk to you later.
All right, take care.